Meet the computer you can talk to. With Copilot on Windows, working, creating, and collaborating is as easy as talking. Got writer's block? Share your screen with Copilot Vision to help spark inspiration, and use Copilot Voice to have a conversation and brainstorm ideas. Or maybe you need some tech help. With Copilot Vision, Copilot sees what you see. Let Copilot talk you through step-by-step guidance so you can master new apps, games, and skills faster. Try now at windows.com/Copilot.
Say hello to the all-new Alexa Plus and see how Alexa can do so much more for you. Need tickets to see your favorite artist? Craving your comfort restaurant? Just sit back, relax, and talk naturally. Alexa's on it. It learns your style, anticipates what's next, and makes it happen across Echo, Fire TV, and more. Learn more at amazon.com/new Alexa.
This is True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time. Week by week, you'll hear the true stories behind the operations that have shaped the world we live in. You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position? I'm Rhiannon Needs, and this is True Spies from SPYSCAPE Studios. Spring in Miami. The gentle breeze, the warm night air, the faint lapping of waves. The year is 1976, and it's the end of another day in paradise. And as the sun sets over the Caribbean, a well-dressed gentleman steps out of an expensive sports car and saunters toward home. But look closer. Is that a furrow in the neat, dark brow? A certain tightness in the walk? Come on, this is Millionaire's Row, Easy Street. What's got him so worried? This is how a story ends. It begins a wide ocean away. A lifetime. Quite a few lifetimes, really. Imagine, if you will, Miami's polar opposite. Welcome to Manchester, England. Rows of poky red brick houses line cobbled streets, slick with rain. It has its charms, but the surfing's rubbish. The year is 1926, and for much of the city's growing Jewish population, this neighbourhood, Cheetham Hill, is home. And behind one of these doors, beyond those neatly swept front steps, a baby is coming into the world. He has no idea what he's in for.
This country is at war with Germany.
Surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba.
Why are we here?
I was doing some genealogy research, exchanging notes with a distant cousin.
That's the voice of Dr. David Tuch. Looking into his family tree, he struck up a conversation that would dominate the next few years of his life.
And towards the end of the chat, when we were winding up, he said, almost matter of fact, "Oh, you should look into our mutual cousin, this fellow named Harold Derber, who was a sailor of fortune, major gun runner, drug trafficker." And it was one of those introductions that was really hard to turn away from. My curiosity was definitely piqued.
Well, it would be, wouldn't it? Who was Harold Derber?
I began with a few internet searches that turned up nothing, and then from there turned to old newspaper clippings, and from there I entered the rabbit hole and began researching government files, archives, and after several months investigating a story, I realized there was a much larger story behind that.
A story too big to uncover alone.
And I contracted a team of historians across the world in Tel Aviv, Manchester, London, Bogota, and dedicated myself to chronicling his life. And what I discovered was a story far more spectacular and dangerous than I ever could have imagined.
In this two-part True Spies story, you're about to find all that out for yourself. This is The Wireless Operator, Part 1. The Trouble with Hyman.
So Harold Derber was born as Hyman Tuch Derber in 1926 in Cheetham Hill, Manchester, which was the Jewish quarter of Manchester. And we actually share our name through the common surname Tuch Derber, so the German line of the family that I'm descended from took the prefix Tuch, and his side of the family would eventually take the suffix Derber.
Hyman Tuch Derber was 13 years old when the Second World War began. He grew up in an ordinary working-class family, the kind of people who worked hard, kept their heads down, and didn't make a fuss. The kind of people who suffer most when events, with that notorious capital E, take hold. You've all seen footage of London during the Blitz, but the Luftwaffe struck all over the country. As a major industrial centre in the north, Manchester was a prime target. All of which, for Hyman, would have been enough to deal with on its own.
The Black Shirts, the British Union of Fascists, were headquartered just outside of Cheetham Hill. So you have to imagine what was a very harrowing experience growing up as a poor boy in the Jewish quarter of Manchester, surrounded by Black Shirts, the Blitz, the evacuation, and the threat of detention camps looming over the family's head.
Detention camps? In England?
Churchill issued an order through the Home Office to detain residents of Austro-Hungarian or German descent and later Italian descent, as well as Nazi sympathizers. So UK residents of German and Austro-Hungarian descent were overwhelmingly Jews. So of the 20,000 UK residents that were detained under that order, approximately 8,000 of those were Jews. His grandfather had to go before the internment tribunal.
With all that in mind, you can well imagine that Hyman Tuch Derber was keen to put as much distance between him and Cheetham Hill as possible. As the war raged on, he saw his chance.
So he finished school at the age of 14, as was typical at the time, and then at the age of 16 he enrolled in wireless college with the goal of becoming a wireless operator or radio officer in the British Merchant Navy.
Merchant navies played a critical role in supporting wartime economies, keeping vital supplies coming in and out. They were also a constant target for enemy submarines. Britain alone would lose more than 32,000 merchant seamen by the war's end.
There are many unsung heroes of World War II, but the merchant navies in particular deserve our utmost respect and recognition.
While some vessels were armed, many weren't. And none of them were built to withstand a torpedo, which is why radio operators were so important. Among more workaday duties, like delivering information on navigation or weather conditions, it was their job to send distress signals during U-boat attacks, hammering out frantic Morse code to armed escort ships in the precious moments before contact.
We can ask why he joined the British Merchant Navy as opposed to the Royal Navy, and one possible reason is that they had an earlier age of eligibility. So one could join the British Merchant Navy at the age of 17, whereas the Royal Navy would only accept enlistment at the age of 18. So at the tender age of 17, he completes his certification as a wireless operator and joins the British Merchant Navy.
During the Battle of the Atlantic, Hyman's first posting was on a Dutch boat, the Van Ostad.
So you have to imagine what was a very harrowing experience. Young Hyman Tuch Derber, 17 years old, and the conditions were very, very deprived. So you can imagine the worst dive bar you've ever been to. Now you're surrounded by a bunch of salty Dutch sailors that are half a meter taller than you.
Later, he joined the crew of a Norwegian ship. They offered better shore leave. And that's important because amid the often deadly pressures of his new maritime lifestyle, Hyman had found an upside. He was seeing the world, more of it than he'd ever believed possible. He wasn't little Hyman Tuch Derber anymore. And I mean that quite literally. While abroad, he'd received a letter from his parents. It informed him that the family name had been anglicised, and so had his own. He was now, officially, Harold Derber. He didn't mind. Going back to his old life in rainy Manchester, to the rubble of bombed buildings and the tedium of his father's market stall, wasn't really an option anyway. On the churning swells of the wild Atlantic, Harold devoted his life to adventure.
So he stays on with the British Merchant Navy after the war.
But peacetime doesn't agree with Harold. He's restless, itching for the next rush of danger. So he starts moonlighting.
And is involved in a number of contraband smuggling operations.
Before long, he'd have the chance to capitalize on his new familiarity with the wrong side of the law. In May of 1948, the State of Israel came into being. This sparked a war between the new Jewish country and its Arab neighbors.
A call goes out to Jewish sailors throughout the diaspora to volunteer for the Jewish Navy. Hyman answers that call, and in the latter part of 48 moves to Haifa to serve as a secret radio operator.
At the outbreak of the conflict, the Western powers had imposed an arms embargo against both sides, intending to drive them to a negotiated stalemate.
Israel, in response, launched a massive illegal arms smuggling campaign. A large portion of the arms came from Nazi surplus weapons that were seized by Stalin in Czechoslovakia and gifted to Israel. So Hyman, as a volunteer in the Israeli Navy, was charged with smuggling illegal arms through the UK and American arms blockade to deliver those weapons to Israel. And it makes for a very incongruous scenario where you have a arms blockade manned by British Royal Navy sailors that's being run through by British Royal Navy and Merchant Navy sailors that just a few years ago were fighting side by side with each other.
At this point, it was the largest arms smuggling operation in history. Harold's good at it, and it pays. A factor that's about to become increasingly important to him.
In 1949, the Exchequer changed the peg of the pound to the dollar, and it depreciated by roughly a third overnight. So because his income was in pound sterling and his expenses were in foreign currencies, his purchasing power was slashed by a third, and I imagine that was one of the prompts that turned him to this criminal career instead. And it's at this stage in the early days of the Cold War that he begins a career sampling in various forms of illegal trade, starting with smuggling contraband oil, arms trafficking, corporate espionage, stock fraud.
In time, Harold Derber established a healthy portfolio of illegal activity. All the while, he was sailing for the British Merchant Navy. This went on until 1958, when he finally hung up his headphones and committed, full force, to a life less ordinary. And when you're looking for opportunities, where do you go?
This episode is brought to you by 20th Century Studios' upcoming comedy, Ella McKay. From Academy Award-winning writer-director James L. Brooks, Emma Mackey plays Ella McKay, an idealistic young woman who juggles family and work in a story about the people you love and how to survive them. Featuring an all-star cast, including Jamie Lee Curtis, Jack Loudon, Kumail Nanjiani, Io Adebri, Julie Kavner, with Albert Brooks and Woody Harrelson. Ella McKay, only in theaters Friday.
This episode is brought to you by Blink. Doom scrolling during this ad break? Ditch the doom and get peace of mind with new Blink 2K Plus Smart Security. Check on home from your phone with 2K Clarity, noise cancellation, and 4x Zoom. Plus, setup is so simple you can easily install while listening to your favorite podcast. True crime girlies? We got you. Get more, spend less with Blink 2K Plus Smart Security.
It's 1960, and Harold Derber is getting used to America. He's been running low-level cons here for a while now, but so far, the rewards have scarcely outweighed the risks.
There's no indication that he had substantial money at this point. In fact, the opposite. He was, bunking up with his friend in New York, basically scrounging for money.
Yes, David, now somewhere in his mid-30s, has a roommate.
His lifelong friend, a gentleman named Ray Adiel, who he met in Israel.
Ray Adiel had been a captain in the Israeli Air Force.
There's also a claim that Adiel was the air attaché to Panama, essentially as an arms broker to Panama. I wasn't able to separately corroborate that, so that could potentially have been one of his first introductions to the arms trade as well. So the two of them become lifelong friends, even though Adiel is less of a thrill seeker than Derber and certainly not a criminal to any extent. But regardless, they both developed a very deep friendship and moved to New York together on the Upper West Side, not far from Columbia University, where Adiel earned his master's degree.
As well as being the very best of friends, the two men went into business together.
Derber and Adiel befriended a young film student at UCLA and produced his first two films. One was a softcore porn film called Peepers, and the other one was a cowboy nudie film called Tonight for Sure.
Neither Peepers or Tonight for Sure occupy much space in the minds of cinephiles today, but you might have heard of their director.
And that young 20-something-year-old film student was none other than Francis Ford Coppola. So Derber and Adiel produced Coppola's first two films.
Coppola's most famous work, it goes without saying, is The Godfather. Somewhat poetically, this was a world that Harold Derber was about to enter in typical style. But not in New York.
Derber had a remarkable talent for finding the world's next flashpoint. So he went from the Battle of the Atlantic to the Arab-Israeli War to the Cold War, and the next destination on that list was Miami in the lead up to the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Cold War in the Caribbean.
It's 1961. Under Fidel Castro, who stubbornly refuses to be assassinated, Cuba is the only communist state in the Western Hemisphere. An ally of the USSR, right on Uncle Sam's doorstep, a mere 90 miles from the Florida coast. In the spring, a paramilitary force made up of anti-Castro Cuban exiles, backed by the US government, had attempted to invade the island and overthrow its leadership. Around 1,400 men landed at the Bay of Pigs, before being soundly defeated by the Cuban Revolutionary Army. 1,100 of them were captured and imprisoned. The failed invasion ratcheted up the existing tensions between Cuba and the United States. This particular wing of the Cold War was getting very hot indeed, all of which meant that tourism, the lifeblood of Miami's economy, was way, way down. Fleets of pleasure cruisers, usually ringing with the sound of happy holidaymakers, were bobbing half vacant on the Caribbean waves. In other words, they were going cheap. Harold Derber and Ray Adiel saw an opportunity.
They jointly contracted a luxury cruise ship called the Calypso liner, and that ship made regular runs between Miami Pier 3 and the Bahamas.
The Calypso's runs took it beyond the 3-mile limit within which American laws applied at sea.
He recognizes an extraordinary loophole, which is that it's legal to gamble in international waters, and that's still the case today. And with the help of the Miami Mafia, created a floating casino on the Calypso liner that was an attraction for the who's who of the Miami Mafia.
Striding about the decks of the Calypso, moustache neatly trimmed, pinstripe suit immaculately pressed, it might not have occurred to the casual observer that he was mobbed up to the eyeballs. But the Federal Bureau of Investigations were anything but casual observers, and he was on their radar.
So initially the FBI took note because of all the Miami Mafia visiting his ship, and although it was legal to have gambling equipment in international waters, there was a concern that he was also transporting illegal gambling equipment onward to countries where it was not legal, such as the Bahamas. A number of the Miami Mafia also had gambling destinations in the Caribbean, and so they were monitoring his ship both as a convenient point to locate the comings and goings of the Miami Mafia, but also to monitor whether or not he was actually trafficking in gambling equipment onward to the Caribbean.
Despite the patronage of the Miami mob's great and good, business was still slow. Derber decided to up his game and bring on some attractive new staff, which is how he met the love of his life, a woman with a troubled past of her own.
So Derber's lover, a young lady named Sari Leslie, is a really, really remarkable character.
Sari Leslie was born Sarah Cohen in a suburb outside of Tampa.
She becomes pregnant her senior year of high school, marries the high school football star, and they go on to have 3 children within 2 years.
Like Harold Derber, she'd reinvented herself utterly.
She decides to leave her young children behind, divorce her husband, and with her identical twin move to Miami to embark on this madcap adventure with my cousin. So she and her identical sister, Susan, serve as entertainment directors on Derber's cruise ship, most likely in response to an advertisement he placed in the Miami Herald for 2 intelligent women to serve as hostesses on his ship. And they are the life of the party on the Calypso liner, providing entertainment for the passengers. And over time, Sari and Derber develop a very deep, passionate love affair.
There was more to Sari than met the eye. During those excursions aboard the Calypso, Sari would occasionally leave the ship to attend to some business of her own, modelling work, or so she said. In reality, her extracurricular activities were of a more political flavour.
She is passionate about the Cuban refugee movement and had joined a number of Cuban exile movements in Miami.
In the wake of Castro's revolution, tens of thousands of Cubans had fled north to America. The plight of these refugees was well publicised, but Sari had taken the fight against the communist regime there further than most.
At some point, she becomes a contractor for the CIA and is using his cruise ship as a cover for her to travel to the Bahamas. And then once there, she takes side quests under bodyguard protection to Havana, where her assignment from the agency is to smuggle cash and corporate documents out of Havana. This is at the point where Castro is nationalizing the assets of the U.S. subsidiaries. And her assignment for the agency is to smuggle greenbacks and corporate documents off the island and deliver them to her handler in Miami.
David doesn't know for sure if Derber knew about his paramour's espionage work. We don't know that much about it, to be honest.
So her CIA file is still pending. The agency informed me they'll provide that to me in third quarter of next year, so hopefully that will lend more insight.
Derber had chartered the Calypso for a song, but sometimes a good deal isn't enough. He had gambled on the trajectory of US-Cuban relations. Perhaps he thought that after the Bay of Pigs, things would settle down to a sort of chilly normality. As it turned out, he'd made a bad bet.
So tourists were staying away from Miami in droves for fear of the Cold War spilling into the Caribbean. And that was even more so the case when the Cuban Missile Crisis broke out.
In October of 1962, the world came as close as it ever has to a nuclear war between Russia and the United States. After Castro agreed to keep Russian nukes on Cuba, President Kennedy ordered a blockade of the island. Fortunately for everyone involved, Kennedy and the Soviet premier, Nikita Khrushchev, reached an agreement which averted a full-scale conflict. But for Harold Derber's business venture, time had run out.
So he had a lot of difficulty actually finding sufficient passengers for the Calypso liner, and the charter for the boat was retracted.
But as we've learned, Derber was never afraid to take risks, even if, to an outsider, it might have seemed like he was throwing good money after bad.
And in true Derber style, he upgrades for even more luxurious boat called the Empress of the Bahamas, which was very much the crown jewel of the cruise ship industry.
And if you're having trouble picturing this opulent vessel, here's a visual aid.
If you've ever seen the movie From Russia with Love, the James Bond movie, Blofeld, the mastermind behind Spectre, has the headquarters on a floating ship. So the Spectre headquarters is the Empress of Bahamas.
Even in real life, the Empress saw its share of shady characters.
He returns to operating a floating casino on the Empress of Bahamas and draws even more visitors from the Miami mob at this stage. And he's bankrolled by Meyer Lansky, who is one of the preeminent members of the Miami Mafia at this stage, one of the leading figures in the Jewish mafia, also known as the Kosher Nostra.
And so Harold Derber sailed on. Outwardly, he was a success story, an immigrant turned self-made man. But behind the scenes, he was in crippling debt to his paymasters in the mob. Caribbean tourism was still down. He needed a windfall. And just like that, an opportunity dropped into his lap.
It's not widely known that after the Bay of Pigs invasion, 1,100 members of the invasion force were captured and held prisoner by the Cuban government in a remote prison on an island called the Isle of Pines. And the prison was surrounded with explosives set to detonate if the U.S. attempted another invasion of Cuba. And there was a very famous lawyer named Donovan, who many of us know from the Spielberg film Bridge of Spies, who was responsible for negotiating the famous spy swap on the bridge. But Donovan would go on to have another glorious episode negotiating for the release of the Bay of Pigs prisoners.
James B. Donovan, former general counsel to America's proto-CIA, the Office of Strategic Services, had his work cut out. He needed to get the prisoners home, but he also needed to maintain plausible deniability for the Kennedy White House, who couldn't be seen to be negotiating with Castro.
So after Donovan successfully negotiates for the release of the Bay of Pigs prisoners, they put out a call for a private ship that can transport back the prisoners. They need a ship that has sufficient passenger capacity and is located in the Caribbean.
You probably see where this is going.
And Derber, as one does, writes a telegram to John F. Kennedy and offers his cruise ship to transport back the Bay of Pigs prisoners. And that telegram is actually in the JFK library, not too far from me here in Boston. And the Red Cross, who was running point for the White House, accepts Derber's offer to transport back the Bay of Pigs prisoners, and they hire the staff and make all of the preparations for this amazing humanitarian mission.
Finally, things are looking up.
And then at the last minute, the offer is withdrawn. It's not entirely clear why. There's one account that Castro changed his mind and wanted the prisoners to be transported by plane instead of boat. But there's another indication that Derber failed the background check because of his possible connections to the mafia.
Most people would throw in the towel at this point. What business does a small-time Miami cruise operator have interfering with such grand machinations? Take the hit, move on. That's what the smart money says. Oh, come now. Where's your imagination?
Derber's response was, well, that's okay. I'll go ahead and do it anyway.
James B. Donovan had successfully arranged for the return of the Cuban prisoners at the low cost of $53 million in goods and medicine, donated by private companies in return for tax breaks. On paper, not a penny of taxpayers' money had been spent. There's that plausible deniability again. But thousands of would-be refugees were still trapped in Cuba, a humanitarian crisis exacerbated by the United States' Byzantine policy stance.
So the U.S. had granted Cuban residents approximately 250,000 valid U.S. entry visas. But then with the imposition of the trade ban, there was no way for them to actually escape from the island. So once a Cuban resident had a U.S. entry visa, they were blacklisted, their ration books were seized, they were terminated from their jobs, their names were published in the newspapers, and they were forced into a life of complete deprivation, but with no way to escape the island.
In these embattled people, Harold Derber saw another opportunity. But to transport them out of Cuba, he'd need the blessing of Castro's government. Luckily, he knew a guy.
and he meets with the founder of Cuban intelligence in Mexico City, a gentleman named Captain Victor Pina.
Captain Pina, suffice it to say, was a big name.
He founded the Cuban Intelligence Service, founded the Revolutionary Air Force, and secured the first MiG fighter planes for the Cuban Air Force, and was one of the seminal figures in the revolution.
How on earth did Harold Derber, who had, until very recently, been a low-level huckster, know someone like him?
There are about 10 major unsolved questions in Derber's life story, and I think this is on the top 10 list. How he was able to make contact and form an alliance with Captain Pina is one of my main unanswered questions. I had the good fortune to befriend Captain Pina's son in Havana, who shared with me the extensive letter correspondence between my cousin and Captain Pina, as well as photographs of them parting in Havana and all the rest. But it hasn't given me any further insight into how he was able to make that initial contact.
Like much else in this story, the details are still waiting to be uncovered. Perhaps Derber got to Pina through some network of contacts from his old gun-running days. Perhaps there's an even murkier explanation. In any case, the two men met in June 1963 and struck the deal of a lifetime.
And Derber signs an agreement with the Cuban government to provide the only transportation, either by sea or air, out of Cuba.
Captain Pina insists that Derber fly straight to Havana to ratify the deal. Doing so would mean giving up his US visa, and that would put everything on the line. His business, his relationship with Sari. He has no idea if any of it will survive. It's decision time. The captain won't wait. And, as he has done so many times before, Harold Derber damns the consequences and gets on the plane. The Senate Hotel, Miami. An elegant young woman, possessed of a beguiling manner, cat's eye makeup, and a beehive you could transmit from, sits at a table, a pile of leaflets to her side. She's accompanied by a plump Cuban, dark hair flecked with grey, a wary look in his eye. Her name, depending on who you ask, is Sari Leslie. His is Irinaldo Garcia Baez. He owns the hotel. In a past life, he was chief of military intelligence under the deposed dictator, Fulgencio Batista. Even now, Baez is a man with a dark reputation for torture and brutality. But today, he's a salesman. And like Sari, he's working for Harold Derber. A throng of people surround the table, because Sari and Baez are selling something they desperately need: hope.
It was an absolutely desperate situation for those 250,000 Cubans that had every legal permission needed to leave but were unable to do so because of the embargo. He was selling tickets for anywhere from $50 to $1,000 to transport these Cuban refugees with valid US visas.
The gathered crowds are the lucky ones. Their families are back in Cuba, unable to leave. Harold Derber's for-profit scheme is their best shot of getting them out. Suddenly, the room is swarming with police. Sari and Baez do not have a license to sell tickets, but it's too late. They've already shifted 1,500 of them. And anyway, Derber's operation has bigger problems.
The Kennedy State Department responds to him saying, well, you can't do this because of the trade embargo with Cuba. And Derber's response is, well, that only applies to US nationals. It doesn't apply to me as a British subject, so I'm free to do trade with Cuba. And it's at this point that the full weight of the CIA and State Department come crashing down on him.
Technically, Harold Derber isn't doing anything illegal. As he rightly points out, the embargo doesn't apply to him. But that doesn't stop the State Department making their displeasure felt. At this point, he's already been denied re-entry to the Bahamas as an undesirable visitor. And one by one, more doors slam shut. An attempted landing in the Cayman Islands is made impossible by a huge demonstration, engineered in part by the CIA. And more to the point, this seafaring mission is missing a crucial element: boats.
And that was very challenging because boats need to be registered in a particular country, and there were no countries willing to have their flag used on a ship that was going to be used in the refugee smuggling operation and potentially also doing trade with Cuba. So he could not use any ship with a U.S. flag. He had a number of ships that were flagged in Panama. Panama refused to have their ships used. But ironically, the UK still had diplomatic relations with Cuba at this point, so he could use a UK flagged ship. And the question is, where could he secure a boat?
Jamaica. Until very recently, the island nation had been a part of the British Empire.
And he chose Jamaica as his operating headquarters because Jamaica had declared independence from the UK at this point, so they were potentially less susceptible to pressure.
But fortunately for Durbar, Jamaican independence didn't mean a clean break with Britain. It was still easy enough to find a boat that sailed under the Union Jack.
So Durbar and Surrey charter a small 23-passenger ferry called the Nana in order to do a pilot run in order to prove the legal precedent that it is possible to ferry Cubans with valid visas.
Almost immediately, the long arm of the State Department swung into action. If they had anything to do with it, the Nana would not complete its mission.
So the Nana was detained for completely made-up safety violations, and the Jamaican authorities were under instruction both from the UK and the US to not allow Durbar to leave Jamaica on the ferry ship by any means necessary.
And when David says, any means necessary, he really means it.
At one stage, the harbour master at Port Antonio, who's ironically a Scottish fellow named Captain Tuch, storms onto the boat and essentially ruins the boat, both by digging a screwdriver into the bilge and beating the engine with a wrench, and essentially vandalizes the ship. Durbar and his crewmate and Captain Tuch get into an altercation on the ship. They break through the skylight on the hatch to the engine room, and Durbar's arrested and is sent to prison in Jamaica. It would be one of the first of many of his incarcerations over his life. But the fact that the harbour master was willing to resort to vandalism and violence to stop Durbar's operation, I think gives an indication of the extent that the Western powers were willing to pursue in order to stop his operation, which is really remarkable at this stage.
Remember, Harold Durbar has come from nothing.
The Kennedy White House is being regularly briefed on Durbar's progress. So in the Kennedy archive, there are numerous memos of President Kennedy being briefed on Durbar on a bi-weekly basis. He's getting the attention of the Joint Chief of Staff, and it's remarkable that a British fellow and his 20-something-year-old lover with a 20-passenger boat in Jamaica is commanding attention at the highest levels of the White House at this stage.
Of course, he's not exactly being quiet about what he's up to.
So he recounts how it was, a financial opportunity of a lifetime, but in a lot of his public statements to the Miami Herald and elsewhere, he fashioned himself an anti-communist freedom fighter and assisting the counter-revolutionaries that were seeking to flee the island.
The narrative Durbar and his team created, the plucky underdog fighting hard for an embattled people, made him nationally famous in a country he was officially barred from visiting. In Miami, anti-Castro Cubans took to the streets to advocate for his project. And at this point, you might be wondering, why was the US government fighting so hard against this? If it's plausible deniability they want, Durbar's operation looks perfect. No taxpayer money was on the table. There was no need to engage with Castro. Well, rest assured, this was a debate that raged in the corridors of American power too.
So there were very conflicting views within the Kennedy administration on whether or not to admit Cuban refugees. The concern from the State Department and CIA and also local Miami politicians is that this could unleash a tidal wave of immigrants into the country, any number of which could be communist sympathizers or undesirables or potentially even Cuban intelligence assets. So that concern wasn't totally invalid. We also knew on the return of the Bay of Pigs prisoners, it included 1,100 members of the invasion force, but also 7,000 quote-unquote friends and family, many of which were hardened criminals and undesirables, meaning people with serious medical issues. And so they were worried that Castro was also going to send immigrants that would pose a burden on Miami social services.
Most of the opposition to D'Urber's scheme came from the State Department and the CIA. The country's young president, John F. Kennedy, took a different stance.
Kennedy himself was very much in favor, actually, of liberalizing Cuban immigration, partly because of his own immigrant background, but also because of the very, very deep guilt he felt over the Bay of Pigs fiasco. He saw opening Cuban immigration as a way to make amends for his missteps during the Bay of Pigs incident. He also wanted to avoid creating a so-called Berlin Wall in the Caribbean by preventing Cubans from fleeing a communist country. It could be seen as a potentially suppressive activity.
Whoever came out on top in Washington, one thing was for certain: Fidel Castro would benefit.
From Castro's perspective, this was a way for him to expel the counter-revolutionaries, also for him to gain a propaganda victory by highlighting the White House's contradictory policy on Cuban immigration, and then also for many of the counter-revolutionaries he was able to expel, he would seize their property and belongings.
If it wasn't already blindingly obvious from his close relationship with Captain Pina, D'Urber's much publicized support for the anti-Castro exiles didn't stop him palling around at the very top of the Cuban government.
It's very clear that Castro directly supported D'Urber's mission. D'Urber met directly with Castro a number of times through a section of D'Urber's CIA file, so it was clear that this was a very high strategic priority for the Cuban government. Sari
Leslie, on the other hand, was a true believer. What did she think of all this?
I mean, based on her memoirs, it appears that her main motivation was humanitarian. Whether or not she was also monitoring D'Urber's activities for the agency is something we can also speculate on. So I think she's playing this very coy game of supporting him, but also monitoring his activities while he's meeting with Castro.
This episode is brought to you by eBay. Buying parts for your car? You'll know that will it work feeling. But on eBay, buying parts is different. eBay's free returns means if it doesn't fit, or if it isn't what you expected, you just print a label, drop it off, and get your refund fast. No haggling, no stress, and at least 30 days to return any eligible item. Millions of parts, free returns. eBay. Things people love. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. Jay Kelly, the new film from Academy Award nominee Noah Baumbach. George Clooney stars as an actor confronting his past and present on a journey of self-discovery, alongside Adam Sandler as his devoted manager. Critics are calling it a declaration of love to the chaotic art of filmmaking, with the Wall Street Journal praising it as a transcendent comedy drama. Jay Kelly is now playing only on Netflix.
When the good ship Nana was in need of repairs after the attempted sabotage in Jamaica, the crew needed somewhere safe to make them, and Castro came through. In the dead of night, the boat slipped its detention and sailed northwest to the Isle of Pines, just off Cuba's south coast. But even as it cast off into the swelling Caribbean, dark clouds began to gather. And no, that's not a metaphor. Hurricane Flora, the most devastating natural disaster to strike the region in living memory, was brewing. As the winds whipped up, the crew of the Nana raced against time to complete their work. Harold Derber, keen to avoid delays, flew back to Havana, his aircraft buffeted by the brewing storm on the ascent. Down below, the Nana attempted to set sail for the mainland. But it was too late. The little ferry was torn apart. The crew survived, barely. But the plan surely was done for. The chances of chartering another boat like it in Jamaica were infinitesimal, unless Harold Derber could find a workaround.
And so the first Nana is destroyed, but they do a swap for a second ship called the Nelson II and rename that the Nana.
The Nelson II was a gift from Fidel Castro's brother, Raul. Obviously, it sailed under a Cuban flag. By renaming it the Nana, giving it a paint job, and retaining the original boat's documentation on board, they could pass it off as the British ship.
They didn't want to give the impression that their mission was being too heavily sponsored by the Cuban government.
In the early hours of the 22nd of October, 1963, 6 Cuban families gather on the dock at the port of Mariel, the closest harbour to the continental USA. Under the watchful eye of Cuban intelligence, they board the newly minted Nana. 23 people. A drop in the ocean, but a start. Escorted by the Cuban Navy, the Nana's modest engine carries its cargo onwards. Soon, it's in American waters. With the lights of Key West bleeding over the horizon, the US Coast Guard roars into action. They buzz the Nana, trying to scare her off. But she stays her course.
They seize the ship as soon as it lands. The Cubans are very briefly detained, but then shortly after paroled and allowed to enter America freely. And Derber's arrested, but they're not quite sure what to charge him with because, as he correctly highlighted, it was not illegal to transport Cuban refugees if they had valid visas, and he was not a U.S. national.
The mission, years in the making, has been a success. 6 families are reunited with their loved ones, and the case has been made for more to come. As Harold Derber awaits his day in court, there's a smile on his face.
And so they charge him with a number of misdemeanor charges, including failure to give the port 24 hours notice, which is hysterical, considering it was on the front pages of the Miami Herald every day for the past number of months while he was trying to orchestrate this illegal smuggling operation. Eventually, the 3 misdemeanor charges are dropped by the judge, but they discover at one point that he had swapped the registration papers for the Nelson II, the ship gifted to him by Raul Castro, with the Nana. And so they charge him with presenting improper registration papers, which again is an absurd charge given the scale of efforts they took to try to thwart him. So the jury is eventually hung in the mistrial, and he's not charged any further.
But this story has multiple endings. For Derber, none of them are happy. Even for him, the might of the US State Department is too powerful to overcome.
They then seek to deport him as a national security risk, without saying what that specific risk is. It's not clear whether or not this could refer to his illegal arms trafficking operations or concerns that they had in any deeper collaborations with the Cuban government. But despite the fact that the CIA and the State Department had been harassing and terrorizing him for the past number of months, they were unable to get any criminal charges to stick and had to resort to deporting him for some undisclosed reason at this stage.
In one fell swoop, he lost everything. The money? There'd be no more of that. His moral mission? Decimated, along with the dreams of thousands of Cuban exiles. Derber was going back to England, back to the place and the life he'd escaped as a teenager. And he was going without Sari, the woman he loved.
They've developed a very, very deep romantic friendship with each other. She has to decide, do I follow him to England, where he's deported to, and continue on this quest, or do I return home to Bradenton, Florida, and try to regain custody of my 3 children? And she decides for the latter, and I like to think that the determination and confidence that she got through her exploits with Derber gave her the confidence to go back and regain custody of her children. So she's able to do so, and then embarks on a very fulfilling life with her new family. But she kept a scrapbook of all of Derber's further exploits, which I had access to, and so it's clear that Derber played a very seminal role in her life.
But if you've learned one thing about Harold Derber, it's that he's a survivor. Next time, David Tuch explores the next chapter of his cousin's extraordinary life.
He shortly leaves England and starts the next chapter in his illegal career, which takes on a completely new level at this stage.
A life of harrowing lows.
A few years ago, he was on the front cover of the Miami Herald in pinstripes and cufflinks with his gorgeous lover on his arm, and now he's languishing in a Colombian prison.
And cinematic highs.
So I would probably estimate his net worth in today's money about $2 billion.
The story continues on True Spies. And if you can't wait, don't forget, you can listen to episodes a week early and ad-free with a subscription to SPYSCAPE Plus. Join now at plus.spyscape.com. Disclaimer. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the subject. These stories are told from their perspective, and their authenticity should be assessed on a case-by-case basis.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here, wishing you a very happy half-off holiday, because right now Mint Mobile is offering you the gift of 50% off unlimited. To be clear, that's half price, not half the service. And Mint is still premium unlimited wireless for a great price. So that means a half day. Yeah? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please click now to give it a 5-star rating or leave a review. Ratings and reviews help people discover the podcast and help us bring you more great stories. And if you have some time, why not forward the podcast to a friend?